So, when I was 18 years old, I worked at a local Target. This was when we used to have a wall right next to the registers, with Pokemon, baseball, other collectible cards. There was also a Starbucks in front of the register right by the front doors. For context, I'm also a female. One day, I was filling this wall with more collectible cards when this awkward, tall man came up and started looking at the Pokemon section right next to me. The man turned to me and asked very politely, "Do you like Pokemon as well?" I said yes, which then led to us talking a bit about Pokemon. I didn't really think that much of it. It just seemed like a bit of pleasant conversation about a hobby. He picked out some cards, checked out, and left. 3 days later, he returned to the store, found me, and bought me candy. Then he just told me to have a nice day. That was somewhat weird, but not really alarming yet. Eventually, though, things really started escalating. He started to come in more and more frequently, always looking specifically for me. He would start sitting at the Starbucks tables and watching me while I worked all day long. Eventually, he started buying me even more candy, Starbucks drinks, flowers, then little girls' panties, pacifiers, small child's hair accessories. Of course, I started to get freaked out at this. I tried telling my bosses what was happening, but they couldn't really do anything about it. They called the cops, but since the guy wasn't doing anything threatening, they couldn't really do anything either. One day, though, he followed me to the back room. I'd started leaving the registers whenever he would come into the store. That's when we were finally able to call the cops. He cornered me in the back room. Thankfully, I was not alone, and our stockroom guys were just out of view back there to basically save me. At this point, we were able to get a restraining order on him for the store, so he could not enter the premises anymore. That didn't stop him, though. Instead, he would just start waiting directly outside for me. Somehow, he figured out which car was mine and started leaving love notes on my vehicle for me to come out to after work. It was extremely terrifying. My mom knew as well, but once again, we couldn't really do anything. The final straw was when he actually followed me home from my work, all the way to my mother's house where I lived at the time. I had never seen his car until that day, when I noticed a strange car following me home from work. When I arrived, I rushed inside. He stood outside the house, singing love songs and reading poems he'd written me, extremely loudly as well. My mother called the cops, and we kept telling him to leave. When the cops got there, they were finally able to get him to go away. Now, though, he knew where I lived. He started leaving me notes at my house, sending me letters and packages filled with pornography, sexy outfits, girly panties, lots of baby stuff. During all of this, my mom and I were trying to get a restraining order on him ourselves and charge him for harassment, but that didn't stop him either. On the final incident, I was coming home from work when he waited around the corner of my house when I arrived, and this time he attacked me. He grabbed me by my face and dragged me down to the ground. I was screaming so loudly and so much that luckily I alerted the neighbors. They came outside to help me out. After they managed to pull him off me, he got arrested at that point. I finally had enough evidence saved up to be able to take him to court, and now he's been in jail for 8 years, due to be released in 2021. He's actually in the Gesture 4 unit. He was stalking another local girl that I connected with, so we could help each other out after he got sent away. Thankfully, she was just starting to get his attention, so he never actually got the chance to hurt her. I still feel sick to my stomach whenever this memory pops back up. I was maybe 15 years old at the time, and my family had taken a trip to a ski resort in West Virginia. I'm the oldest out of 2 boys and a girl. The girl was maybe 6 at the time. She was adorable, big blue eyes and this crazy blonde hair. Bold and mature for her age because she'd grown up around all the big kids. My younger brother, who was maybe 8, and my aforementioned little sister decided to hang out in the sauna with me. We had been to the resort a few times before, and I was 15 years old. That seemed like a reasonable age to go off for an hour or so with just me and my siblings. Well, stupidly, while in the sauna, we wanted something from the hotel room, or I think wanted to tell our parents something maybe. This was before you brought a cell phone everywhere you went. In our idiocy, we decided to send my little sister to go do it. Thinking back, I really can't believe we decided to do that. But you know how immature kids think. You get the one who's the youngest to do the tedious stuff. Well, some time had passed by, and we heard my sister come pounding down the hallway in her pink bathing suit, sprinting, with an older man chasing behind her. I'll never forget how he looked. He lunged forward, walking as quickly as he could. His eyes bore into my little sister. There was a tight frown on his face, framed by his white mustache. My brother and I watched in absolute shock, trying to understand what was going on. The sauna had a glass door looking down the hallway. I rushed out and grabbed my sister, pulling her into the sauna and staring at the man with wide eyes, scared but doing my best to be defensive. The man instantly froze when he saw us and began slowing down. Then he walked by the sauna like nothing had ever happened. It was at the end of the hallway though, so there was nowhere else really to go. Because of this, he stopped for a moment, then looked to a door right on the other side of the sauna that led to the gym, and mimed an "oh," as if that was what he'd been looking for the entire time. Mind you, he was wearing a collared shirt and slacks. He actually looked like he was shaking a bit. Needless to say, I asked my sister what exactly had happened. She said shortly after leaving the hotel room, the man had come out of nowhere and started following her all over the place. She got really scared and began running. He started running after her. I told my mom what happened, and of course she was so pissed we'd sent a little girl out in a bathing suit through this big-ass hotel all by herself. I still get sick when I think about what could have happened. If he'd grabbed her before she made it to the sauna, I can still see his gross mustache in my mind, and get so angry when my mind replays his sheepish "oh," as if chasing a small girl down a hallway is a normal thing to do while looking for the gym. I felt guilty for a long time for sending her out, and guilty for not saying something to him or reporting him. I sometimes wonder if he had done this before or after. In those moments, I try to remind myself just how young I was. I'm just glad I was there with them. Had it been just her and my little brother, who knows what could have happened. I was about 15 when I got my first real job in West New York, New Jersey. My mom had sent me to live with my sister, who was 13 years older than me. She and I had recently gotten into a huge argument. So much so, in fact, that we hadn't spoken in well over a week. Because of our argument, I ended up taking the bus to work that week instead of letting her drive me there. This place always had a lot of people coming in and out. I mostly served coffee and pastries for the customers. I had just moved from New Jersey to Florida, and I've always been a relatively nice and polite person. Smile, be conversationally friendly. Well, apparently I left an impression on some man who hung around during the day to talk to me, and generally would just wait for me to get off. Again, I was 15, and this guy must have been well into his 40s. I kept on working, and as the hours passed, he would come and go, always checking in and asking if I was almost done. I remember specifically him asking a lot of questions about when I was getting off. Did I live close by? Who was picking me up? The man seemed friendly enough though, and I really didn't know better, so I kept on small talking throughout the day. I really didn't want to be rude to a customer and lose my first job. Well, I had a relatively short shift since I was so young. When my time to clock out came, I tried to leave without making a big deal about it. This guy was keeping a real close eye on me though, and started to follow me out of the establishment. He wanted to accompany me to my bus. He just wanted to make sure I'd get there okay, he said. The man grabbed me by the arm and told me to come with him. He basically stalked me the entire day, and now he saw his chance to make his move. At this point, I started to get pretty scared, since this was back before I had a cell phone, or even really before texting was invented. I didn't have a beeper either, so I had no way to call for help. I hadn't made it that far from my job yet. I was still in the parking lot. Like a bat out of hell, though, my sister suddenly sped into the parking lot mad as hell. Needless to say, when she saw this guy tugging me in the opposite direction, she got even more mad. Of course, she yelled at me and told me to get the fuck in the car. Then she proceeded to yell at and threaten the man who was very obviously trying to abduct me. He hauled ass away, and when she got me in the car, she started throwing out all kinds of expletives. What the fuck were you doing with him? Etc., etc. When I finally got the opportunity to tell her what actually happened, she gave me the tightest hug, and we both started crying together. To this day, this is the part we both couldn't really understand. She told me that she had been coming home from work that day, when she had a sudden nagging sensation she had to pick me up from work right now. She didn't even know I was working that day, but she had the sensation that she just needed to come get me. I worked a good 20 to 30 minutes away from our home. She proceeded to ignore this persistence at first. She parked, got into the elevator, and as soon as the doors closed, something inside of her screamed, and all of the alarms went off. She came back to get me, got into her car mad as hell that she was listening to this suspicious feeling or intuition or whatever that was alarming her. She didn't even think I was out of the house. But sure enough, she got there just in time. She's never experienced something like that since or ever before. I really don't know what to make of all of that. All I know is that she saved me that day. The guy kept trying to hang around, so I quit that job shortly thereafter, and she never allowed me to ride the bus there again or leave work alone. I grew up in a fairly small town. I was allowed to walk and play a couple of blocks from home, but only with the company of one of my older brothers, and later our family dog, a super protective Rottweiler mix. That was only when I was older though. I was never allowed to leave the house by myself because my parents didn't want anything bad happening to me. In the area where I lived, there was a pretty well-known neighborhood creep. An old man, probably 60 or so in age. He lived alone in a house on the street adjacent to ours. In the house next to his lived a couple that were very good neighbors and great friends of my parents. Let's call them the Smiths. They were about the same age as my folks as well, and really loved children. Unfortunately, they couldn't have any of their own though. My parents had 7 biological kids and 4 non-biological kids. I was the youngest of all of these. There had been a few incidents where I remembered running into that neighborhood creep, one being when I was at the corner gas station with one of my brothers, when he walked up behind me, smelled my hair, and told my brother that I was delicious enough to eat. Another when I was riding with my dad in his truck. The guy flagged down my dad and asked if I was my dad's wife. I was only 10 years old at the time. He was a major creep, but there's one particular incident that always stuck with me. My siblings and I would often go over to the Smiths' house because they were really nice, they loved us, and they would let us swim in their pool, which we didn't have one of. They would also pay us for doing small odd jobs around their home. Oftentimes, when my parents were busy, they would offer to watch me. Most of my siblings were teenagers with a lot of extracurricular activities, so I would be the one left behind. One day, one of my brothers and I went over to the Smith's house. My brother was in charge of watching me that day. Mr. Smith offered my brother some money to help him move some stuff out to the front of their house for a yard sale, and to help them sell the things as well. Since I was so young and really didn't have anything to do, while the yard sale was going on, I was just sitting on their front porch playing with my Barbie doll. A few people had came and went to stop and look at the goods. Some of the items were running out, so my brother and Mr. Smith took the opportunity to go inside and go through more stuff to sell. Mrs. Smith was busy trying to help someone who was buying things. At that exact moment, came along the neighborhood creep. He looked around, trying to seem interested in buying things, and then walked right up to me. He bent down, grabbed me by my hair, and said, "How much for you?" I was incredibly shy as a child. I would cry even if strangers waved at me. Needless to say, this was too much. I literally pissed myself in fear and started crying, screaming, and wailing. I shouted repeatedly for my brother and Mr. Smith. As I did this, the man let go of my hair. Mr. Smith and my brother came running outside immediately, and the man took off quickly as well. All else that I remember is my brother picking me up and carrying me home while I was crying, while Mr. Smith tried to figure out what the hell was going on. I don't think anything ever happened to that guy in the end. A few years ago, I reconnected with an old acquaintance on social media. It started out pretty slow. He'd like things that I posted every now and then, which grew into him liking almost everything over the course of a few months. At first, I only took that as a cue that perhaps he liked me but was too shy to make a move or something. It was cute, but not something I really paid attention to. Generally, all he'd do was post cryptic lyrics, and we didn't have that much in common. Around the same time, though, I started to get this cliché feeling that I was being watched. For reference, at the time I lived in a house out in the middle of the woods, so there weren't exactly a lot of people around. There was a lot of foliage though, so I suppose it would have been very easy to hide in the bushes or something. Our lawnmower wasn't the best, but it did work. You could adjust the height of the grass. Somehow that mechanism had broken though while my brother was out mowing the lawn one day. So we ended up with some weird patches of bald grass and some of grass that was extremely huge. No big deal. Later that night, though, I saw a post from that same old acquaintance about the patterns in the grass. It seemed like it might have been a song lyric, but no matter how hard I searched, I couldn't find a song that matched up to it. I didn't really think that much yet. I was slightly startled, but maybe it's a coincidence, right? That was until I was outside the next day and realized our lawn had those same strange patterns. That mishap, plus me being a big old paranoid weirdo, got me really freaked out. I tried to calm myself down though. I mean, it's probably nothing, right? Plus, what could I even do? It's not like some lyrics proved anything. A few nights later, I got that same exact creepy feeling. So on a hunch, I went out to our front porch. It was quite large and there would be no easy way to sneak up on me, so to say, so I felt safe watching out for anything. I waited there and listened intently. Then I just sort of got the feeling and started yelling, like I knew he was there, even though I didn't see anything around me. I yelled out that I thought he was really creepy. I talked about all the terrible things I would do to him if he ever made the mistake of coming near me, and then I went back inside and locked everything. I know this sounds really dumb and like nothing, perhaps me just being paranoid. Immediately following this incident though, he unfollowed me from all social media and stopped liking anything I posted. In fact, he stopped interacting with me altogether. When I went to his profile, he deleted that suspicious lyric about those patterns in the grass. Maybe it was all just coincidental. That's what I'd like to believe at least. Maybe he'd finally gotten sick of my ramblings, and that just happened to coincide with my speech that day. But maybe, just maybe, he was out there in the woods watching and happened to hear me say that night. This happened in the port of Scarborough of our sister island Tobago. It's quite customary for Trinidadians to take their kids to Tobago for the Easter holidays or for summer vacation. Back in '97, my mother carried us for the summer holidays. A week later, on a quiet Sunday night, we were all at the port of Scarborough, waiting for the late boat to take us back to Trinidad. It was around 9 p.m. or so, and my family and I sat in the departure lounge, waiting for the MF Panorama, which was late as usual. The passenger population was quite small, rounding up to around 20 to 30 working-class people like us. These were the days when Wi-Fi internet was yet but a dream, so the only entertainment for us passengers was this little beaten-up 32-inch CRT television that mostly just showed static. Because of this, most of the passengers began to doze off, including my mother, older brother, and younger sister. The only passengers that remained awake were a handful of old men off playing cards, myself, and the middle-aged cotton candy salesman who had his colorful assembly of wares on him. I was age 10 and a rather naive and impressionable young boy. The man, seeing me staring at his cotton candy, beckoned me over and asked which one was my favorite color. I replied that it was yellow, and to my surprise, he plucked a yellow cotton candy from his arrangement and handed it right over to me, for free. I told him I was going to wake my mother to get some money to pay him, but he informed me that it was on the house. In the back of my mind, I recalled my teachers of years ago warning us kids, don't take anything from strangers. Then again though, my mother was just a few feet away, so obviously there was no threat. I began to eat the cotton candy, and the man began to speak to me. This place is really boring, huh? I was amazed. He sounded just like my friends from class, with the way he phrased and uttered his sentences. It was rare when I heard adults speaking like kids. Yeah, why can't they just have a bigger TV here with cable or something? The man then mentioned he knew my father. Really? I replied in awe. Yeah, tall, red, mixed-race man. What was his name again? Trevor, I replied. Yeah, that's it. Trevor is my boy. Kinda loud sometimes. I shouted excitedly, won over by such a description. Yeah, that's my father. He asked how Trevor was doing, and I gave a long account of my father's history and personal problems, how him and my mother separated a long time ago. Then I started speaking of school and my friends. He kept on interjecting about my father and how sad it was I didn't have a father figure in my life. It irritated me a bit, but I continued nonchalantly chatting away to my new friend about every random thing that came to mind. Hey, you want to see a ship sailing in? How? I replied. Upstairs, come on. There's a nice view. You can see the entire ocean. The whole ocean? Can you see Trinidad from up there? Yeah, of course you can. You can see anything, little buddy. We went upstairs together to the second-floor lounge, which was practically devoid of life. There was only one single lady who was stood at the rails staring at the ship that was 100 yards away. The man took me to the furthest side of the room, and we stared at the sea. He began pointing at made-up locations of where random things should be. At this point, the lady finished her sightseeing and left. Immediately, I felt the old Cotton's arm drape around my shoulders. I don't have a son, you know, only daughters, he said in a much more mature tone now. Okay. This feels good, huh? Ever wanna travel the world? I didn't answer him. It didn't feel good. It felt weird. I thought he would have removed his arm by now, but instead he gripped me even tighter. Something was not right about this. To make things worse, we were now completely alone. Suddenly, I heard a voice calling out from downstairs. Elijah, where the hell did you go? Elijah! It was my mother's voice. Apparently, she had just woken up and seen I was missing. The old men playing cards informed her immediately of where I'd gone and who I'd gone with. She wasted no time in sounding the alarm. I was grateful for her intervention. I went away from the cotton candy man and back downstairs, where almost the entire population of passengers stood, eager to see who was this Elijah, the would-be victim. My older brother was standing there swollen-eyed and irritated from being startled awake. As I approached my family, my brother mumbled something like, "Going upstairs with a man, are you gay or something?" Rather than feeling safe to be with my family and out of that man's eerie grasp, I suddenly felt very embarrassed. My mother continued her big scene, holding nothing back, calling the man a rapist and a sicko. A person ventured upstairs to grab the cotton candy man, but came back down saying the floor was now completely empty. He'd somehow found a way to escape everyone down below. I was rather angry at the time at my mother for embarrassing me like that, but as I've grown older, I became more grateful for her quick-witted reaction, saving me from being kidnapped or worse.